I could be honest, it's the uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest, it's the uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest, it's the uncomfortable conversation. If I could be honest. Hey y'all, so I'm back as promised. This is part three, and I'm going to do a brief recap since it's been so long since I released part two. But before I do, just as I did with 1 and 2, I'm going to give you a trigger warning because I know that I hate when people say the word but we just gonna leave that in because I'm gonna try not to say a million and one times. But I'm going to start with the trigger warning because I understand that some people experience post-traumatic stress. When you hear certain things, I'm going to be talking about molestation, rape, abuse, child neglect, things that may make you very uncomfortable. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just look over some things, give you a minute to leave the room, turn me off, or turn me up so that you can hear everything that I'm saying, with hopes that this right here is going to impact or change you in some way. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a recap of part 2, where I talked about how I was called at work. My daughter was molested by not one, but 2 of my nephews in the same day. And only one of them admitted to what he did. And the reason that he said he did it was because he was shown, I don't think I shared this in part 2, but he had just been shown some porn, some child porn. And at the time he was 8 years old. So imagine being 8 years old and you are shown pornography by somebody that you love and respect. That can turn into a very bad situation. I believe if I had to put myself in an 8-year-old's mind, it made him curious. Like it's normal and natural for it to make, if you see something that is that graphic and like, I just believe it made him curious. And then he then tried to act out what he saw on camera, like to my daughter. So he admitted it. My nephew at the time, who was 16 because my daughter was 4, and I explained to you last time, if you didn't see it, I encourage you to go back to 1 and then 2 so that you don't have to do too much catching up. But so that you're not lost in the story. So he was 16 because he was 12 years older than my daughter. So of course he said my daughter was lying. Where I left off, I pulled my kids from my mom's. We went on. I put them in daycare. They stayed with went to a couple home daycare centers, and they ended up at a daycare center called the Playground. So fast forward, I'm still, of course, a working mom, single mom at the time of 3, not 5. And it was difficult because I had to work. I couldn't just stay home. I had a job where I was making 6 figures, so I could afford childcare other places. Eventually, my daughter ended up in school, and because she was in a charter school at the time, it was like maybe a mile from my mother's house. And so I elected to take my kids back to my mom's. And at the time, I'm going to fast forward, and this one will be a little all over the place. I didn't find out. So at the time when I took her back, my daughter was 7. So at 7, my nephew was then 19. So from 7 to 9, I found out that he had began molesting her again. And she never said anything until 2021 is when she let me know what happened to her from 7 to 9. Very heartbreaking. However, there's a very important, during that time, at about 9 years old, I ended up pulling them again for a whole year because we got into an incident. There was an incident where my nephew had a baby. The mother had a friend who was sending her son to spend time with one of my nephews who she was dating at the time. And I remember saying to her, I dropped him off for her. She rode with me. And I remember saying to her distinctly, you got to be careful. I trust my nephew, as in the nephew we were dropping her son off to. I trust my nephew. I said, but you got to be careful just dropping your children off to people, because one of my nephews like harmed one of my kids. I said, you got to be really careful. Don't just drop your children off to anybody. Make sure that you know these people, that you know what kind of environment they walking into. I said, you just be careful who you trusting your children with. So she must have said something to her friend. So I remember walking to my mom's door to drop my kids off. And my mother says to me, you told somebody that one of your nephews molested your daughter? And I said, I did, because it happened. And the mother of, so my nephew's baby mom, I ain't want to call him that because that's so ghetto. My nephew's child's mother, she stands up on the bed and she says, excuse my language for all the saints who gonna be offended by this, because I'm Christian myself. She stood up and was like, your lying ass daughter, ain't nobody touch your motherfucking daughter. And then he was like, your daughter's a fucking liar. And my mom is standing there like, why would you say that? And she said something that I'm not going to say on camera because it will embarrass my mom. I was embarrassed. I'd be embarrassed to say it for her. But she said something that made me look at her sideways. And my niece was standing behind me, very silent. It's important to remember that I said that. She stood behind me very silent while they're standing there saying, your daughter's a fucking liar. And my daughter at the time is 9, and she's standing next to me and she's hearing me like defend her. And so I took my children, and it got so heated that I ended up dialing 911. So the police came, I filed a police report. We end up leaving. Again, I'm gone from my mother's house for a whole year. It's so important. I really, really, really just really need you to remember that that my niece is standing behind me quiet. My nephew is standing beside me calling my daughter effing liar. And his baby mama is standing up on the bed as if somebody had to hold her back, because she wasn't being held back. She wasn't going to come after me. She knew better. But she's sitting there calling my daughter a liar. And I remember saying to her, you better worry about whether or not he's going to touch your fucking daughter. I made sure I said that to her because I never trusted him around his daughter. He had a daughter. I didn't trust him around his own child because of what I believed he did to my daughter at the age of 4. What I didn't know was that at the age of 9, when I pulled him from my mom's, that it was actively happening because my daughter never said anything again until 2021. So, and forgive me, I just had notes right here because I didn't want to make a left and go down the wrong street, So we leave there. I end up moving to Charles County. My kids, by this time, I moved them to Charles County Public Schools because we moved down here, and even though they were in charter school and the county I was living in didn't govern whether or not my children were in boundary because they weren't stricken by boundary, because it started off being a private charter. And so then my kids were, one after the other, they were given sibling preference to go to this particular school. And it was a bomb school. Imagine was the name of the school. Imagine Lincoln. Imagine Lincoln Public Charter is the name of the school. Ooh, I hope I ain't losing my voice again. I was so amped up when I woke up this morning and finally had my voice and could talk. But yeah, it was called Imagine. And even being at that school, oh my gosh, saved me and my children in so many ways, because there were people that I connected with that really helped me navigate what I was dealing with silently. This silent battle that I had to deal with, there were people that God had already positioned to help me navigate it. And they didn't even know they were being used. They probably won't know until they see this, if they watch it, But there were a couple teachers there who really were instrumental in helping me to maintain sanity, to make educational choices that served my children before we ended up leaving. And I'm still connected to a lot of them now. So especially their teachers in kindergarten and pre-kindergarten, I'm still connected to those people. So that was a recap. So that was a recap from part 2, which led to 3. We moved to Charles County. I transferred my kids. This is when trauma really began to hit me all over again. So remember, I didn't know what was happening from 7 to 9. So by the time my daughter is 12, there's an incident that happens where my children come to me and tell me that my daughter had touched one of my sons. I was so mad. because all I could think about, talk about triggers. So this is when triggers come into play, because when it happened, I instantly was angry, righteous anger, because I thought about what he did to my daughter at 4. And all I could think about was that old saying, hurt people hurt people. And I was like, here we go. Here we go. So I'd always told my kids, I think I told you guys in part 1, that I've never subscribed to the what goes on in your house stays in your house. Absolutely hate it. Never liked it. Never subscribed to it. Never will. I've always told my kids, you tell if somebody touch you inappropriately, even if it's your mama or your daddy, tell anybody that will listen. Well, one of my sons went to school and did just that. So I remember being in bed because at the time I was kind of sick. I was having a lupus crisis at the time. And I remember going into, I went in for infusion and I came home. And because that generally takes hours and I was drained, I remember being in the bed and I was just so sick and so tired. And at the time I was serving diligently at the church that I was a member of. And there was somebody serving in ministry. I had just been asked by the woman who was leading our social media ministry. She had just asked me if I was interested in kind of stepping up and helping her so that she can do some other things. And I was like, absolutely. God rest her soul. I miss her so much. She really inspired and helped me. Even during that season, hindsight, when I think about it, oh, Wesley, I'm not supposed to cry this still.
You about to make me cry.
She was so helpful. And I remember her calling me that particular day and asking me if I wanted to step up. And I got excited, even with everything that that just triggered me the day before. I remember telling her, yes, I need a good distraction right now. And so she was like, well, what's going on? And when I told her, it is so beautiful because like she passed away, but I never heard my business anywhere else. And I remember telling her what happened. And before she did anything, before she responded, she just said, let's pray. And I was like, oh, I love her so much. So we prayed and she was like, it's going to be okay. And I was like, I believe it. I said, I've been through worse. And the worst was my daughter being molested at 4. So right after I hung up with her, I was told myself I was going to get some rest. Because by this time, it's like almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I get a phone call. And it's from somebody else that served with me in ministry. And she's like, I just wanted to give you a heads up. And at the time she was dancing and serving on social media. And so she's like, I just want to give you a heads up. Today your son came in, and I'm not saying my kids' names intentionally. My children said, eventually they'll figure out who's who. And they said that they didn't care, but just to protect my kids, until they're ready, I'm just going to say my son or my daughter. So, because I got a lot of them. So she said, your son came in today and told us that your daughter touched your other son. And I was like, yeah. I said, unfortunately, they came to me last night. I said, we talked about it. I said, and then I had to explain to her, gave her a brief about, what happened to my daughter. And I said, I just think this is that hurt people. And she said, it happens. She said, because kids get curious. I don't think I mentioned this before, but when it happened, I took my daughter to her pediatrician at the age of 4 to make sure they didn't do anything or tamper with her or do any permanent damage or anything like that. And it wasn't that aggressive in nature. So mentally it was, psychologically, emotionally, but physically it wasn't. So I did take I took her to her pediatrician. So the same with this, I had already made an appointment and I had a conversation with their doctor and she said, unfortunately this happens because kids get curious. There's this thing called age appropriate touching. I don't like it, but their doctor was explaining it to me. So when I talked to the young lady who served with me in ministry, kind of under me in ministry, she was just like, it happens. Unfortunately, we hear about this a lot. She said, I'm just glad he said something. I said, me too, because imagine being in a household and nobody says anything or it's a dirty little secret. It can end up being the worst situation ever. So she said, I just wanted to give you a heads up that CPS was going to be calling you. I said, it was that bad? She said, yeah, based on, what he had said to us. And in my mind, at this point, I'm like, it got to be more than what, they told me last night. So no sooner than I hung up with her, I get another phone call, and it's from someone, a guy at CPS, and then there was a knock at the door. He was calling me to let me know he was approaching my home, so they didn't waste any time. So he comes to my door. He tells me that he wants me to bring my children. He gave me his business card. He came in. He talked to me for a minute. It was brief. He gave me his business card, told me I had to bring my children down to what was called the Center for Children down here in Waldorf. So I was like, okay, great. So we went down the next day, and when I got there, there was a relative of mine. I'm not going to say her name. She is a clinical psychologist. She has her own practice, and when I tell y'all, she is the most ethical person I know. I absolutely love her because even her husband didn't know about this situation, and we're blood relatives. Her husband and I are blood relatives. So she comes out into the waiting area and she speaks to me. And I was shocked to see her because I didn't know she worked there. So I had all 5 of my children with me, of course. And I didn't have a conversation with them beforehand. I just told them we had to go to the Center for Children because of the incident that happened. I didn't prep my kids because I didn't believe I have to, because I'm not into secrets. I wanted my kids to be as authentic and as free and transparent as humanly possible, because there may have been something that needed to be shared that I didn't know about. So she comes out and she says, hey, Mika, she's like, your case was turned over to me, but I told him there was a conflict of interest. When I saw your kids' names, I knew that I couldn't take it. And I was like, okay. She was like, it's going to be okay. I said, I know. And I said it with such confidence because I know that I didn't do anything to harm my kids. And basically, that's what I was being accused of, like touching my kids inappropriately, or that it was happening in my household, which is where the introduction was. And it wasn't. The introduction, unfortunately, was when they were at my mom, when my daughter was at my mom's, being babysat, at my mom's for daycare. So we ended up going to the Center for Children. The police were there. My kids had to, I'm going to condense this part because it was like months and months of us going to the Center for Children, them talking to my children. The initial one, the police were there. They talked to my kids. It's important to remember this too. I made the mistake of saying to my kids, I lied to my children. And I never lied to my kids. I'm very honest with them because I told you we live unfiltered, transparent lives. We talk about everything. We have the most uncomfortable conversations ever. But I lied to my kids this particular day. So I was in the room initially when they talked to all of my kids. And then I left out. And they talked to my kids individually. They talked to them collectively. But I remember saying to one of my children, one of my sons, like, I could hear everything that's going on after we left the Center for Children. That day, I remember saying, this is the only regret I have, the only major regret I have. I remember saying to one of my sons, I could hear everything that was said behind that glass. So if it's something you ain't tell me, you better, tell me now. You better tell me now because I can hear everything. I saw and heard everything. Y'all, that was a lie. That was like your mother telling you she had eyes in the back of her head. You remember your mom used to say that? You'd be like, okay, I better not do this because she could see me. I was so mad at myself. Hindsight, last year when, even more came to light. So told my son I could hear everything that was going on. And I said, anything else you want to tell me? And he was like, no, ma'am. And I'm like, okay. So I ended up fighting for basically to keep custody of my kids, fighting to prove that I wasn't the one that was molesting my children, that I wasn't the one introduced, sexual immorality to my children. And of course, we won that battle. That was something else we had to deal with, right? So during this time, again, I'm doing all of this in silence because I couldn't go to my kids. Me and my mom had a conversation because she was offended by the fact that I said that me and my kids were on an island all by ourselves. And I had to explain to her that we were. We absolutely 100% were. For her, I think she was offended because, and forgive me, Mom, I think that's more ego than it is anything else. And ego is like a killer because it had nothing to do with you. It had to do with the fact that we were navigating this journey that had everything to do with sexual immorality and what happened at my mom's house while she was supposed to be taking care of my kids and I was paying her to do it. So and it's going to get uncomfortable because I'm not doing this, to please anybody else I'm doing this so that healing can go forward, so that we are set free, so that I bring awareness, so that people are more conscious of what goes on with their kids, even at home daycare centers, because this was my mom's house. the place where I felt like my kids should have been safe. Now, while I still believe that my kids would have been safe with my mom, the problem is my mom wasn't home. My mother had left my children with my nephew to be babysat by him because she felt like she could trust him. She couldn't. He was a whole pervert out in these streets. Predator, pervert, and pedophile. Like, because pedophiles, okay, so let me not, so I'll come back to that because that's something I wanted to touch on, in this episode. But so I ended up, I told her we were on an island by ourselves because we were. We were on an island by ourselves because there was nobody I could have gone to besides my sister in Christ, Mary, God rest her soul, who was so amazing again with helping me navigate this. She gave me some really good advice, some really good guidance. There were a couple times because we were on different time zones. It was so cool because there a couple times I remember sending her a message. And one night I was like, I'm having a really hard night. I'm really struggling with this thing, especially with my mom. And she was like, call me. Like, I know she was probably asleep, but she didn't care. She was just a listening ear. And so in that sense, I wasn't on an island by myself because I had access to people like Mary, Sister Mary. But when it came to my family, like, I stand on the fact that for more than a decade and a half, I couldn't go to my family and say, hey, I'm having a fight for custody of my kids. I need for somebody to support me and let them know that it wasn't me that was touching my kids. My mother couldn't do that at the time because she did not want to admit to herself that her grandson was actually touching my daughter. You know what I mean? So she couldn't really support me. So even if she wanted to, she was biased because she did not believe my daughter. And I'll come back to that because, of course, the story goes on. So, we navigated this thing. I was serving in church. I buried myself in the word. God was the only thing that saved me. God and one of my nieces. Y'all, it got so bad during this particular season. Hold on. Okay, you don't got to pause. You can just keep going. I just want to make one phone call, okay? Okay. Because I said that one day I was going to have this conversation, right? And even being on an island all by myself, I just want to get permission from my sister to use my niece's name. Thank y'all for y'all patience. Come on. So while I'm waiting for her, while I'm waiting, okay, this her texting me. Quick question, comma. Can I use my niece's name? I'm talking about how she saved my life that day, and I wanted to give her flowers on camera, period. So just let me know. So while I'm waiting for my sister to respond as to whether or not I can use her daughter's name. So outside of having access to Sister Mary, God rest her soul, and her talking me through some hard days, there were two other people. One is my niece, and while I'm waiting for my sister to respond, the other was the woman who called me to talk to me to give me the heads up. She was a dancer. So during that time, because we were doing so much and burying ourselves, I was burying myself in the word and serving diligently. All my sons, at the time, one of my sons had decided he wanted to join the dance ministry. And he had just gone through his season of what they call acclimation, where they basically put you through rigorous training to make sure that you're cut out for it because they didn't just let anybody serve. Okay, I'm sorry. And so that Saturday, we were going to the Saturday after they closed out my case with CPS. Praise the Lord. I'm sorry. Okay. So that Saturday, they were having the celebratory, after you go through a season of acclimation, they do this really beautiful thing where they had this music playing, and I think it was William McDowell, and it was Intercession. It was either that or I can't remember the song, but it was playing, and I remember just sitting there because I just wept. It was such a beautiful experience. They actually washed the feet of the dancers and their parents with those who had children joining the dance ministry. And this woman, and I won't use her name because I don't have her permission, but she washed my feet. She chose me. I'm not sure how they pair people up. I think that you just choose whoever you want to serve. And so she chose to serve me. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna keep crying. I'm gonna try not to cry. She chose me. And so while my son sat to the right of me getting his feet washed, she was washing mine. And as she washed my feet, she literally, there were tears just dropping. And I believe it's because she knew what I was going through in that season. And it's hard. At the time, she wasn't a mother. She became a mother shortly after that. But it's hard, like hearing the things that I shared, which is one of the reasons that I really didn't talk about it a lot, because I know that for people who have children, people who are parents, people who want to become parents, it can be a scary thing to hear the stuff and the perversion that my household was plagued with. So, oh, so it was hard to hear it, I'm sure. And so she basically, when she washed my feet, she just cried. Like her tears, I could feel them hitting my feet. And I just was thanking God the whole time. Thanking God, not just that I got to experience that with her, but that season was like passing because it was so hard for me. I was just so grateful, so grateful. Okay, yes, she said yes. Yay. She said, yes, you have my permission. Thank you, sister. And so that sister, her name is Tracy, because you guys will know who her daughter is. So there were, when I say a few people I can't say I was on an island by myself in that regards. It was Sister Mary, the woman who washed my feet. And that is such a beautiful thing. Those who are in ministry, that's something you guys should explore, because I believe that each one teach one. I really believe, and one of the things that I will walk away from the church that I was a part of, that mega church, that's one of the most beautiful experiences I did have, was that, the washing of the feet, especially since they're dancers. And when they would dance, baby, they left it all on the floor, because my son was totally committed. He was so committed to dancing and loved it so much that my other sons ended up dancing too, because they love watching their brother minister. So let me get myself all the way together. Sorry, y'all. The other person, y'all, it got so bad. I was so sick. It gotten so bad that I was in bed. It had to be about 11 o'clock at night. And I have written out letters that I still have to this day. One to each of my children. One to my mom. One to my mother-in-law. She wasn't my mother-in-law. I didn't marry her son, but I had a couple kids by him. And she was the woman that like covered my kids in prayer. She was like the first real introduction to what warring in the spirit looked like for me. And she had said some things to me in a letter prior to. And so I written her a letter too. And then I wrote one other letter to my ex-husband, God rest his soul, of some things that I needed to say to him. But I had written out basically letters because I was going to end my life. Like, that was the day that I decided I had so much suffering. I was so tired. I was exhausted. I was ready to go. I was ready to experience a different life. And I knew that heaven was real because I'd experienced it. And so I wrote these letters out and I'd taken out medication and I was just going to go to sleep and not wake back up. My children were already at my sister's house because after everything that happened, it was warm, it was the summertime. After everything that happened, I refused. I refused to let my kids go anywhere else where I couldn't, like where I didn't really trust people. And so the only other place they went to after, that happened, I didn't allow my kids to spend the night out, it was my sister's. So they were all with my sister because I had just had surgery too on my knee. And so I decided that I was going to end my life. And my sister just happened to have called me. And she was like, what you doing? And I was like, nothing. She was like, no. She said, what's wrong? And I was like, nothing. She was like, you lying to me. Sound like something's wrong. And I was like, I just can't do it no more. Like, I was like, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to die. I'm ready. Like, I want the suffering to stop. And even then, my sister didn't know everything I was dealing with. And my niece was so eager to talk to me on the phone. She said, well, I was calling you because Tristan wanted to talk to you. I call her Pumpkin. And so she got on the phone. She's like, Auntie, I love you so much. So children are so innocent. They're so pure. Children are taught to be mean. They're taught bad habits. They're taught to be racist. They're taught that these are learned behaviors. Kids are born so innocent, so pure. And the one thing I know for sure is that she loved me. If it were one of my kids calling, I'm sure it would have had the same effect and impact. But in that moment, I couldn't even think about my kids. I was so tired of suffering because like what I'm sharing now is just a fraction of some of the things that I went through. I had gone through so many other things, like so many other things leading up to that point, and I just got tired. And when I tell you, she sat on the phone with me, my niece, she talked to me. We had to be on the phone for like at least an hour. And to this day, I said it recently because unfortunately, her father was murdered on February 10th by supposed to be a friend, an acquaintance, because the guy's ego was bruised. He decided to take my niece's father's life. And I had written one day on social media, one day I'm going to tell the world how you saved my life. Because I swear to you, if it wasn't for the fact that my sister called me because my niece wanted to talk to me, like we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. And I would have caused even more trauma for my kids who had been through enough. But so while I can give her flowers, Pumpkin, you saved your aunt's life. Thank you. I love you. Because I don't think I've even told her. Her mom knows. But of course, I couldn't tell her that now she's 14, so she can handle it. You saved your auntie's life, baby. That is why when you call me, I will do anything I can because you saved my life. And I'm so grateful for that. My kids, I'm sure, are grateful for that because my children don't even know this. So I probably have to blow my nose in a second so that I ain't all clogged up. So I wasn't on the island by myself in that regard, but my mom got offended that, she felt like I was saying that they didn't help me. And she couldn't because she didn't even want to come to the realization that her grandson was a predator. So one of the things that I wanted to share, because I think people have and I got some notes, so forgive me. I don't like scripted, not going to do scripted, but I made sure that because I want to give actual information that might be helpful to people because oftentimes we assume things, but the information is out there. You just have to go research it and find out. So one thing I wanted to do is I called him a predator, but he wasn't just, so predators, I believe, hunt where they're trusted. And predators, they're basically people who seek out their victims and they target people who are weaker They target people who are vulnerable. A lot of predators go after, especially when it comes to girls who have absent fathers, or girls who are easy, people who are easy to manipulate. That's what predators do. They hunt where they're trusted. But he was actually a pedophile too. So pedophiles are people who target children in specifics. And he again was 12 years older than her, and she wasn't the only girl, she wasn't the only child that he molested. She wasn't the only young girl that he molested. So once you get to 3, for me, you're a pedophile. Because if you're targeting children, and for the life of me, I still can't understand why my daughter, for him, like, I don't understand, like, what, after it happened at 4, I think he felt like he got away with it, and that's why he did it again from 7 to 9. But my daughter, again, because she didn't tell me about it, I still don't understand why he felt like it was okay, especially finding out what I'm about to share next, right? I really don't understand why he targeted my child. Like, everybody would call me crazy when it comes to my kids, and I am, and I'm unapologetic. I don't care. I am crazy when it comes to mine. So I didn't understand what made him feel like he had a pass other than being a predator. And it just, for me, only thing I can think of is demonic. That's the only, if I had to come up with one word, demonic. So I wanted to give some, not fun facts, but some knowledge. Definition of predator, what a pedophile is, examples of molestation, because some people don't know. I mean, I guess we can assume some people don't really want to talk about it, but some examples of molestation that I gave my kids. And I remember, and I actually, as y'all can see, like, I ripped this out of my journal because I journaled a lot, which is how I wrote my first book, how I finished up my second book that's coming out in the near future. Is I journaled a lot. I got like 100 journals in my garage in a tote. Don't try to come out and get them. It's a gold mine. But my kids, so I gave them 5 examples of what molestation was, touching private areas. And then, of course, my kids they wanted to go through what private areas were. So we had to do that. Molestation, exposure of your genitalia, and that is your private areas. Exposing someone to your private areas is like an inappropriate sexual act because it's something that you're doing, taking explicit or inappropriate pictures, and persuasion of anything that's like sexual in nature. And when I say persuasion, that's getting someone, especially young people, to do something that is explicit or inappropriate in nature, and then actual physical touching of or violating the person. So I definitely 100% feel like he was a pedophile, and because he understood. I think the only thing I can think of is that he knew that I was a single mom of 5 because he was family, blood relative. He knew that I was always busy with working. He knew that my children were going to my mom's house for daycare. And so he knew that he had the opportunity. I mean, that's the only thing I could like really think of, hindsight. So, but again, I wanted to give y'all those facts. And I really believe that there was some pedophilia in him too, because why would you introduce, aside from molesting these girls, why would you introduce this other child to porn at such a young age? Like, to me, that's predatorial and pedophiliac behavior. So okay, so those are the facts that I wanted to give you all. And of course there's non-pedophile molestation as well. So pedophiles aren't the only ones who touch children. There are some non-pedophile who don't intend to target children. I guess it is your intention. If you do it, it's your intention. Is how but studies have shown that there are some non-pedophiles who have, molested or violated in some way a child. So for me, I remember having a conversation with another relative. He's not a relative by blood, about something I heard he did, and I recorded it. He knew he was being recorded because we was on FaceTime. No expectation of privacy, and I'm very direct, and I let him know we're gonna have this conversation. I'm gonna ask you some questions. You're being recorded, and if you lie to me, I will press charges. So it's also important to know in the state of Maryland, there is no statute of limitations when it comes to pressing charges for rape, molestation, sex assault. There's there is no, sorry, and I want to make sure in DC, so in Maryland, there's no statute. Yeah, in DC, you have to, and this is something, just in case people don't know, in the state, in DC, which is not a state, I was gonna say the state of DC. In DC, you have to come forward before the victim's 36th birthday. Did you know that? No? You ain't know that? You know now. Just so you know, FY. You have to come forward before their 36th birthday, and the penalty can be prison up to life, plus 5 times, depending on the crime itself. In the state of Maryland, there is no statute of limitations, and the penalty, depending on the crime, can be life without the possibility of parole, right? So, let me make sure. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay. So, yeah. So, after fighting for custody of my kids and being able to keep them and going through Pumpkin saving Auntie's life, I ain't I ain't got stuff running, do I? I look fine? Okay, cool. Listen, I love him so much. Aside from that, life was still rolling, right? But that wasn't it. There was more trauma to come from this sexual immorality, is what I'll call it. So, shortly after Pumpkin saved my life, it was about 2000, and I have a timeline. It's about 2016. So that was 8 years ago. 8 years ago, I'm laying in my bed, and I'm talking to one of my nieces about, what had just happened, with the custody of my kids. And she sits up in my bed, because we're in my bed together. This is how close we are. She sits up in my bed and she says to me, I just want you to know that I believe your daughter, and I always believed her because he touched me too. Y'all, that trigger hit again. And I sat up and I was like, why didn't you say something? And she's like, well, because my mother didn't believe my daughter, so she didn't think that she would have believed her if she told her. And what bothered me was that, so I'm like, so it happened after he touched my daughter? And she's like, yes. So, spoiler alert, she lied, right? So I'm still, like, even today, June of 2024, I'm still navigating the betrayal. I'm navigating the lies. I'm navigating all of these areas, because why the hell would you sit in my bed? Why would you lie? Why would you offer me a lie? And here's the thing, I let her live as a victim. I let victims be victims, because it's not up to me to take that from them. It's not up to me to tell her when her healing has to come or how she goes about her healing. I can give her guidance and stuff like that. But I believed her at the time. So she says to me that she had a conversation with my daughter and told my daughter that she believed her. Well, that's a no-no. Hindsight, y'all. Don't go talking to people's kids about stuff that's sensitive in nature without clearing it with them first. But then again, she had done things, another spoiler alert, she had done things that put me in an uncomfortable space, but because I loved her so much, well, I still love her. I'm good on certain things, but she had already done things that were too much. Like she gave my children liquor. You hear that? She introduced my children to liquor, something that I don't drink. I don't knock people who do, but because addiction has hit people close to me, there are certain things I don't do. And how many of you know that addiction starts with introduction? And so she introduced two of my children to liquor when they were minors and she was an adult. That pissed me off because you don't like, she had already done things that violated me as a mother. And so, when she told me that it happened after it happened to my daughter and that the only reason she didn't say anything was because my mom didn't believe my daughter, so she knew she wouldn't believe her either. Okay, so I let her live in that. Life goes on. I didn't tell anybody. I said at some point you got to say something to my mother because she deserves to know, right? I'm sorry, I just touched the mic just in case it was muffled. Let me repeat that. At some point, you have to say something because she deserves to know. And so, and plus, like my daughter didn't have to be on an island all by herself. Like she didn't have to believe that nobody believed her except me, So remember early on, I said it's important to remember that one of my nieces stood behind me while my daughter was being called a effing liar, right? And I did this because that means in quotations. Like she was so you standing behind me and you hear them calling my daughter a liar and you don't say anything, not even to me then or to defend her in any way, but you don't say anything. So when you stay silent, that's an agreement. Like I tell people all the time, when I talked about in the last video how somewhere in my bloodline there was an agreement that sexual immorality could go forward, and I was breaking that agreement verbally because whether or not it's verbal or nonverbal, there was an agreement made that that kind of behavior was going to be accepted in our bloodline, and that's why I had to say absolutely a hard hell no. Excuse my language again, saints. But so I was like,